Hello and welcome to my studio. We are now in Lyngør, a small community spread across 4 islands of the southern Norwegian coast. For 12 generations my family has lived in this car-free village. My father is a sailmaker. We are now in his sail loft. My grandfather was a sailor, and as a kid I used to row to school, which is on the island across the sound here, where I was met by the only other pupil in my class. Later in life I circumnavigated the Atlantic Ocean in a pilot cutter built in 1894. This year-long journey was a watershed for me and laid the foundations for my life as an artist. Everyday life in Lingard is closely connected with and influenced by the sea. And against this backdrop, I find the inspiration and materials for my pictorial experiments. I'm happy for the opportunity given by the American Scandinavian Foundation to show you my studio, its surroundings, and a little bit about how I work. Inside this old herring saltery, moved to Lyngør in 1890, I have set up a darkroom. Here I can make large silver gelatin prints on fiber paper in widths up to 65 inches. These are wet mounted on aluminum and are exhibited in frames made by a local boat builder. In my photography, I work with conveying something about nature. And it is a clear advantage to live right in it. As you can see, we're pretty close to the sea. I think it's 20 feet from the door of our house to the sea. On high tide, there's water in the basement. You are really close to the elements. But there's also a calmness here, a serenity that I have not found elsewhere. At least in the winter. I photograph either on the islands in the archipelago here or from a boat. I do a lot of sea-borne photography. I come straight in from the sea, into the darkroom, develop, see if I've got something, and head back out, if not. A common thread is to let go of some of the control over the recording. It could be photographing from the mentioned boat, and then you don't have complete control over where it drifts and the movements the waves create. Or in previous projects I have introduced different objects such as sails, kites and lights, which are given free rein during the exposure. You can call it stage photography, but I like to think of it as an objective approach. I've planned it, so it is subjective as well, of course, but I think it's interesting to talk about the objective part of photography, because it seems to be left out recently. Back when they were trying to make photography an art form, it was claimed to be impossible, because it was completely mechanic and thus completely objective. You pressed a button and got a mirror of reality. I don't know, maybe there's still some kind of shame related to admitting that you don't have 100% control of your artwork. I do believe that I achieve a more honest representation of the forces that surround us by giving up some control and not knowing precisely what I will get. I don't know if I can call it experimental photography, but there's a lot of trial and error with multiple exposures, long exposures, and so forth. So it's nice that I can rather quickly see what worked out and what didn't. If something looks promising, I make contact sheets an enlargement, and then maybe something bigger. I'm not obsessed with big prints, but something can happen when you go up in size. I try to communicate the feeling of being in a landscape, and it may be that this feeling is transferred in a better way if there is a certain size to it. But the images don't always work small, and they don't always work big. It's always exciting to see. Photography is widely used in science to illuminate, discover, or research phenomena that we cannot see with the naked eye. We are in the middle of something right now with changes in our nature that might be too abstract to take in, that we don't notice, or that are too nuanced. And since I'm pointing my camera at nature in this century we're in, I'm talking about climate, whether I want it or not, so to speak. This is not something I have trumpeted until now, but I had an exhibition in Oslo where a professor of biology gave the opening speech, and then it became pretty clear that climate was part of the theme. There is something called false color images, which is often used on images from outer space. Most of the pictures you see from outer space, the wow pictures of star fogs, for example, they don't look like that. The color wavelengths are adjusted so that our eyes can see them. False color as opposed to true color. I have thought of this as a nice analogy to my pictures, that I illuminate, or in a way I color things that you cannot see or notice. Perhaps the interplay between our optics and the mechanical optics can help illuminate these things we do not see or notice, and hopefully create an awareness of this, and at the same time talk about our inadequacy and the consequences of this. We need to talk a little bit about Lyngør too, and we can see here what it looks like without snow. Lyngør's history is closely connected to maritime trade and to sailing ships. Lyngør was known among sailors as a safe, although unpopulated haven already in the late Middle Ages. The islands were populated in the 1600s when southern Norway became part of a northern European maritime trade system. Lyngør now became a maritime service station, providing ships a safe haven, refills of food and water, craftsmen to repair both ships, masts and sails, and even able seamen. Peaking in the late 1800s, Lyngør was a maritime town with 600 inhabitants, most of which were involved in maritime trade as ship owners, wharf owners, sailors, navigators, maritime craftsmen, and innkeepers. Ships based in and with crew from Lyngør sailed all over the world. Being so dependent on wooden sailing ships, its significance diminished when steel ships driven by steam engines took over, and when the building of lighthouses made it safer to sail by night, thus reducing the need for night stops along the coast. By 1930, the population was reduced by 2/3. The downfall did, however, also mean that Lyngør only slowly modernized, keeping much of its shape and structure as an 18th or 19th century maritime village. This is one of the reasons why Lyngør was awarded the prize of Best Kept Village in Europe in 1991 by the EU. The inhabitants of Lyngør are still closely connected to and being shaped by the sea today. All traffic to and between the islands of Lyngør has to be by boat. There are no cars or wide roads at Lyngør. The weather changes during the year and the winter storms can be tough. The historical significance of Lyngør as a relic of or a window to a maritime past is under pressure from modern tourism and from investors wanting to exploit its highly regarded status. In 2010, we unfortunately had the price per square meter record in Norway. Since the school was shut down in 2000, the population has declined by 100, and we are now down to approximately 35 all-year residents. Situated at sea level, the village is also threatened by climate change. The area surrounding Lyngør, a huge archipelago of islands and rock formations, is included in a recreational area. This park was constituted in the 70s by our first environmental minister. Actually, the world's first environmental minister. The land was expropriated from its owners, and now it's owned and maintained by the state. The park, with its islands and sounds, equals the size of Denmark. I'm very happy and proud of this park that allows for this area to remain in its original state. The area has been further protected by becoming a national park, where 98% of it is underwater. The entire area is a terminal moraine, shaped by the ice that covered these lands. Skjærgård, with the nearest suitable English word skerries, is a very characteristic geological feature for Fenno-Scandia and Scotland. Here you can see me out flying my kite. A technique I used a lot in my earlier work. I used to lift sails with it, and as you can imagine, I have good access to sails. Sails in different shapes, colors and weights. They all react differently to the wind. For me, it is somewhat tricky to make single motion freezing exposures like straight photography. I have deliberately stuck myself in a conceptual thought. What I'm working with here are triple exposures from the shore. Here you could say that the time that passes in between the exposures has a larger impact on the result than what happens during the exposure. Let's head inside this old herring saltery. That also holds my father's sailmaking business that he established in 1976. There is a restaurant on the ground floor, and in the first floor a chandlery that is managed by my girlfriend. She makes canvas products and is also a landscape architect and beekeeper. The store is open all year round. We are now in the most sacred room. Here we have some normal vertical enlargers, but the elephant in the room is a bit special. It's an 800-pound beast that I got across the fjord on a barge. Of course, it started to rain, just got it into the buildings, first floor, quite a lot of hassle, and then it had to be lowered into the floor because the room is simply too small. It's on rails, and it is mainly the distance to the wall that determines how big the image will be. I work with fiber paper, making silver gelatin prints, and it has become a relatively rare thing, at least making very large sizes. The paper does not react to the red light, but if I had worked with color images, I would have had to work in total darkness, which I'm glad I don't have to. So, the name, silver gelatin prints, has to do with its silver emulsion. Very briefly, it was discovered that silver went darker in sunlight. But this process just continued, so something was needed to stop it. This is based on the same thing. You have a paper that has a silver emulsion applied to it, which makes it react to light. And then you light the paper with a negative. The areas that receive more light become darker, and those that receive less light remain white. And now we have a latent image that has to be developed. When developing, there are three main steps. Developer to bring out the image, stop to stop the process, and fix to fix the image so that it can withstand light. Rinsing is especially important with this paper. I think it is important that analog photography survives as a craft. My father is a sailmaker, and sailmaking has been declared a profession with historical value in Norway. Perhaps the darkroom profession should be as well. Many people photograph on film, but scan and print digitally. But someone should know the whole process. With the rise of AI and Sony World Photography Award given to an AI image, analog photography could become more important. Maybe press photographers should go back to film to prove they are showing us the truth? People have different reasons for sticking with analog photography, and I have mine too. One of the more interesting things, I think, is the case with editions. Art photographs are usually made in edition, and two enlargements from one negative will never be 100% identical. I tend to say that they are 95% identical, or more. In this way, you can say that these are originals to a greater extent than with other digital production techniques. In that sense, it is also very important to see the pictures physically before possibly investing in one, because there could be variations, especially from screen to print, of course. I use, for example, a matte paper often. It creates a special expression that is difficult or impossible to simulate on screen. The fiber paper shrinks a lot when it dries, and the large ones are especially tricky to handle. So they are mounted on aluminum when they are wet. They dry through the night, then I trim the edges and frame them. I've used a lot of walnut, but here you see a piece with waxed oak.
The frames are made by a local boat builder.
You have now gotten a little impression of how it is to live and work in Lyngør. And if I was to say something about my motivation or aspiration, I'd say it's all about being able to live here, where my family has lived forever. To remain here. I'd like to keep this year-round business running, to have lights in the windows in January as well. Maybe have some interesting people over for a visit or even to move here. And well, so we can keep the grocery store running, and it's pretty simple and down to earth. Again, thank you, ASF, and hopefully we can meet over there at some point. There is a story of two sailors from Lyngør who met on Manhattan, and it's a very short story because they simply said hi and passed each other. And that's because it was so ordinary to meet people from Lyngør all over the world during the age of sail. Okay, thank you for watching.